Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Hush Blackwell, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly. And our topics this week: local dreamers get an unwelcome wake-up call. Those who dream of a new airport start the fall campaign. And being governor in Kansas may not be a dream job, but lots of people want it, plus roasted toast. But we start with our interview segment and focus on the new series about the Vietnam War from legendary documentarians Ken Burns and Lynn Novick. The 18-hour look at the conflict begins this Sunday at 7 on KCPT. Joining us now to discuss the series is Dr. James Wilbanks. He's a Vietnam veteran who teaches history at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Dr. Wilbanks was a consultant for Burns and Novick as they developed this major project, and we are quite pleased to welcome him to Ruckus. Dr. Wilbanks, thanks for coming in.
Glad to be here.
So how did you become involved with Ken Burns and Lynn Novick?
A colleague of mine, longtime colleague and friend, Roger Spiller, who unfortunately passed away last month, had been involved with them on making of the World War II documentary. And he was asked to participate in the production of the Vietnam series, and in the process he recommended me. And then Ken and Lynn asked me, and of course I agreed.
You served in Vietnam.
I did.
In the U.S. Army.
I did.
And you've written extensively about the Vietnam War.
I have.
I saw the preview down at the Midland Theater last Friday. You were part of the group on stage. And I must say, after watching an hour of the clips, I think this series is going to engage the American people for a long time after it finally gets rolling this Sunday.
Oh, I think it will. I think they've done a magnificent job of trying to take a 360-degree perspective and show the war from all sides. And I think they've done a very balanced and engaging, in a balanced and engaging way.
You know, one of the things that interests me is that historians often view historical events differently. There's a word, historiography. People have different views. Is there a consensus view from historians about why the United States got engaged in the Vietnam War?
Well, I think the consensus is it was all under the rubric of the Cold War and stopping the spread of communism in Southeast Asia.
You say the rubric. Was that not the legitimate reason for the war?
Well, I think certainly within the times it was a legitimate reason. The decision makers, I think, were most honest men trying to do the right thing, and in those particular times, the Cold War was very real, and it seemed a conflict between East and West, wherever that conflict might happen. And of course, it happened in the case of Vietnam and Southeast Asia.
The goal was to keep South Vietnam non-communist, to give the South Vietnamese the right of self-determination.
Yes. Of course.
It didn't work out that way, did it?
No, it did not work out that way, but our involvement there dated back to the Truman administration. Yeah. And of course, Eisenhower is the one who talked about the domino theory. And the idea was to stop the Vietnam domino from falling and keep the rest of Southeast Asia from going communist.
I remember, as I'm sure you do, the 1964 presidential campaign and Barry Goldwater, the Republican nominee, Major General in the Air Force Reserve, as I recall. Barry Goldwater said if he had been elected president, he could have ended the Vietnam War successfully for the United States. Do you think that's a realistic circumstance?
Given what I know now, I think that was probably not very realistic. It's interesting that the Vietnam War wasn't that large of an issue in that election. And I think that was by design. That
was before the massive buildup by the Johnson administration of U.S. forces. Have you been back to Vietnam as part of your activities with Burns?
Yes, I've been back 6 times.
How does the country look now compared to when you were there during the war?
Well, I didn't go as part of the Burns effort. I went on my own, or I took groups of students back. It's very interesting. More than 65% of the population was born after the war. Mm-hmm. They look at it, if they think about it at all, it's the American war, and that's just a war in the continuum of Vietnamese history to them.
Yeah. Saigon, which is now, I guess, Ho Chi Minh City, as I recall it from my brief exposure there, was a beautiful city.
It is a beautiful city, and most of the people who live there still call it Saigon. Okay. The country is prospering. It still labors under a one-party government, but I think that's changing over time as that particular generation begins to go to their particular reward.
Final quick question, is this Vietnam War and your study of it of importance to the students at Fort Leavenworth who will be the future leaders of the Army?
I think in an anecdotal way up until this point. I think that, as you mentioned, Ken Burns and Lynn Novick came there on Friday before we had our program downtown to talk to our students, which number about 1,200 captains and majors. And they were very much engaged by the program, so I've seen a peak in the interest in Vietnam just in the few days since last Friday.
Dr. Wilbanks, thanks very much. Pleasure to talk with you. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. Enjoyed talking with you.
Now here's a reminder, the Ken Burns series, The Vietnam War, begins this Sunday at 7 on KCPT. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus. Lisa Johnston is a consultant and columnist. Steve Rose is a Johnson County civic leader and a columnist with the Kansas City Star. Mike Sanders is the former Jackson County executive, now in private legal practice at Humphrey, Farrington, and McLean. And attorney Laura McConwell is the former 3-term mayor of Mission, Kansas. Welcome back to all of you. It's good to have you with us. Thanks for coming in. Although there are still some areas of disagreement and confusion, it appears the city will move forward with a November 7th vote on building a $1 billion one-terminal airport. The preliminary choice to get the project is Edgemoor Infrastructure and Real Estate of Maryland, associated with Clarkson Construction in Kansas City. Not all city council members are totally on board, and competing companies are still disgruntled over the apparent outcome. Well, no matter which company is scheduled to build the airport, it won't matter if voters don't give the go-ahead. Someone who knows a great deal about how to execute winning elections in Kansas City, Missouri, Steve Glorioso, is unconvinced that voters are ready to say yes in November. Someone else who knows how to win elections in Kansas City is Mike Sanders. Mike, do you agree with Steve's assessment about the election?
I think the selection of Edgemoor is a bit of a game changer. It changes the dynamic for this entire issue. I think a lot of the negative press and warts around this process centered around what looked like a process that was stilted in one way. I think when the city council, when the vote came back to recommend to the full council that it go to Edgemoor, I think that changed the dynamic substantially. So I think there's a real chance in November this would pass. Now, the most recent poll that I've seen, this would have started roughly 12 months ago. Anything to do with KCI and the airport in terms of renovation, new, et cetera, would have polled in the low 30s to mid 30s. Today it appears like it's in the mid 50s. So it looks like the public perception of this project has changed as well.
Well, Steve Rose, I thought the city council had a selection committee to decide which company should get the contract. The selection committee decided, and now the city council has taken no action.
Well,
what are they waiting for?
Well, the city council has the ultimate responsibility for making the decision as to which is going to be the contractor. So, I mean, legally, you have to go through those steps. You would think they would rubber stamp the work that these people have spent months and months and months and months and months, working on and coming to. But, you're hearing right now people in the council who are trying to leverage minority hiring at a certain level, and they want women businesses at a certain level, and if they don't get that, they're not going to vote for this and that. I mean, they're still holding hostage the ultimate decision. And of course, we're running out of time. And I know these polls, I've seen these polls. I mean, we put together in my family a wedding in a lot less time than they want to put together a citywide election. It's just going to be, they're going to have weeks.
Well, we saw one of the frequent panelists on Ruckus, Gwen Grant, on television yesterday making the announcement that minority-owned and women businesses must get at least 40% of the business from any contract at KCI. Is that a reasonable expectation?
40%?
Yeah.
We need. I think that's a little high, but we need some game changers, and I don't disagree that they're right to be concerned about what's going to happen with minority and women-owned businesses.
What do you think?
About the
40%?
minority issue? I mean, I think it's a nice benchmark or a goal. I'm not sure that it's reasonable to get there right away, but I certainly understand Gwen's
There'll be
concern.
some set aside for that purpose, right?
Well, certainly. Now, I do want to make the point that with this election, the challenge is going to be turnout, because the most interested people are going to be the flyers. Non-flyers may not be opposed, since it's going to be privately financed and there isn't going to be a tax increase, but they may not be that motivated to get to the polls. If they're going to convince flyers, they need to have complete transparency about what the costs are really going to be, how much more is parking going to be, how much are fares really going to go up, and then also highlight, we haven't heard about what the benefits are going to be. How many more direct flights are we going to be getting? All of those kinds of things need to be brought up if they're going to sell this.
And I think that's important, but I think getting back to Gwen's point, and I've been hearing more and more and more on the radio this concern about minority and women-owned businesses and what piece of that construction pie they're going to get. And I think something needs to happen. There needs to be some kind of assurance to those folks, because they can bring out, in Kansas City, Missouri, they can bring out a ton of voters, and they will mobilize
There's
their
another
base.
component that's totally missing. They are not going to be presenting a conceptual drawing.
Yeah,
Well,
we
that's
haven't
it.
seen what the new airport will look like.
Trust me, it'll look like something. Well, I mean, the convenience factor is huge.
Yeah.
At least they ought to show there'll be structured parking right where the parking is right now, so it'll be equally convenient.
Well, how could
for
the
people.
select
How can they
committee?
just-
How could the select committee make a selection without seeing what the airport would look like?
I think they looked at the financing and decided that's the best financing, and we'll go with that.
Mike, you're in favor of a new airport. Is that fair to say?
I think ultimately you have to do something with the airport.
Okay, what
exactly does that
is
look
the
like?
best rationale to say to voters, here's why we need a new airport? The amenities, safety, security, what is
To me, it's all the above. I think with a brand new airport, you save a lot in terms of overhead. But I think you have to look at what is the purpose of an airport. Now, we fly out of there for convenience. But at the end of the day, I've sat in boardrooms and rooms where we've tried to negotiate Fortune 500 companies to locate to Kansas City. And one of the main topics that they discuss is the inconvenience of our airport. They can't fly, whether we want to hear this or not. They can't fly the CEOs, their board members in and out, their lawyers, which I'm really for lawyers flying in and out conveniently, in and out conveniently. And that's a huge negative for Kansas City. So it's something that ultimately has to be done. We have to do something with that. But I think a secondary calculation, which is what Lisa talked about, and that is this is a user pay system. There are going to be fees that we're going to pay when we go there, and the federal government is ultimately going to pay for this. It's not going to be ultimately passed on to the taxpayers.
Well, look at the Sacramento airport. That's what I mean. That is all passed on to the users to fly into that airport.
Correct.
You're paying you pay a premium. Now it's a beautiful airport and it's convenient, and I'm assuming that there would be an economy of scale.
We need to do that cost-benefit analysis. And I've joked that KCI complainers should be flown directly to LaGuardia, JFK, or Newark, and then come back and tell me how bad KCI is.
Right.
Because, I mean, obviously KCI has issues, but the airport isn't terrible. The sale needs to be made on how things are going to improve here, and that the cost-benefit analysis works out for the flyers.
It's too bad you people don't have anything to say about KCI, but we're going to move on. We won't be electing a new governor in Kansas for another 14 months, and we won't even be picking the nominees for another 11. But in a recent column, Steve Rose tells us who the two winning candidates will be. Democrats will select Representative Jim Ward of Wichita, minority leader of the Kansas House, and the GOP will pick Secretary of State Chris Kobach, known nationally for his views on immigration and voter fraud. Both have been ruckus guests and both acquitted themselves well, in my humble estimation. Since we have Mr. Rose with us, who already knows Ward and Kobach will be the nominees, perhaps he will share with us which one will be the next governor.
Oh, well, I think it's... if those are the two...
Well, you say they
think,
are
No, it's a fair question. I didn't answer that in my column.
No.
But it's a fair question on Ruckus. I would have to say that I think Ward would win the general election. Kobach is very unpopular according to the polls, but the polls are polling Republicans, Democrats, and independents. When it comes to just Republicans, he will prevail in the primary. And the reason he'll prevail is because even if he only has a 25% hardcore following, every time some other Republican joins the race, it fragments off the other people, and they're shooting each other. And Kobach's just going to slide in here with his, 25 or 30%, and he'll get it locked up. But when it goes to the broader audience, I think Kobach is unpopular enough that a Democrat could beat him, a good Democrat.
All right, Laura, you've heard Steve's views. You probably read his column. What's your assessment of the situation in Kansas?
Well, so right now in the Republican race, we have, 6 or 7 folks that are in there. I don't think you can count out Ken Selzer, who's our secretary, our insurance commissioner, or insurance secretary. He is all over Kansas. He meets with Kansans. His office has been very responsive to folks and have a high rating, and he is not the controversial person that Chris Kobach is. One of the things with Chris Kobach, and I don't know if some of the base some left but may come back. But in the primary, in the caucus that we did in 2016, Ted Cruz won the state, and about 2 weeks before, Chris Kobach had come out staunchly in favor of Donald Trump, and I know that really upset and alienated a bunch of his base, which I don't know will come back or not. So I don't know. I think it's open. And then if you have a number of conservatives, folks like that in the race that are vying for that vote, I think it may open up for Ed O'Malley, who's out of Wichita. He hasn't been an elected person for a while, but I think he's got some good visioning. As to who would win, I agree with Steve. It's going to depend on who gets those nominations, because I think a lot of Kansans are
it's
really
not an automatic win
unhappy.
for the Republican nominee.
I don't know that it's an automatic win. I think Chris would have
it's
issues.
not an automatic
Correct.
win. Laura, what about this guy who's the lieutenant governor of the state, and by the time the election comes around will probably be the governor of Kansas, Jeff Collier?
Well, certainly he might seek the nomination.
Well, I think he said he's going to seek it.
But my opinion is that Kobach's profile will overshadow him. He is not a charismatic force as a person from what I've seen thus far. So unless he really revitalizes his image, I'm not sure that he could really compete with Kobach. Kobach is nationally.
Who's not a dynamic figure? Collier?
Collier. I don't see him as a dynamic person. And even though he's been lieutenant governor, he has not been a prominent figure. I mean, certainly many Kansas know who he is. I'm just not sure that he could overcome Kobach in a primary.
Having been in the state legislature and as this lieutenant governor, I mean, he's everywhere. I mean, he goes and meets with a lot of people. He is not the brash personality, clearly, that Chris has. But
His name identification statewide is
correct.
terrible. But as he becomes governor,
it'll increase that.
I ask Mike a question here. Regardless of who the candidates are in the next governor's election in Kansas, what kind of issues do you think will come forward?
I think it's the same stew that's been warmed up for the last several years. I think KDOT financing, they used to spend $200 million to maintain the roads and the highways in Kansas. That's been reduced to $30 million. How do you close the giant donut hole in the budget? You can't balance a budget by tax decreases. I think that's a major issue. But we're going to come back to school financing. That issue has not gone away. I would say those are the
Voters have nothing to do with that either, do they?
Absolutely not. Not directly.
Not directly.
However,
but interesting, the only thing that they're talking about right now when you meet with them is I am a problem solver and I am a unifier. That's what they're. That is the right now the manifesto of how to run for the office. And eventually, they're going to have to talk about the policies, but right now, that's all they're saying.
I'm the same thing, a problem solver. We're out of time, and a unifier. Do you all agree we should move on now to the next topic?
Well, let's vote on it.
Good. No, we don't vote here. No. Stories that make national headlines often find resonance in the Kansas City area. One of the most recent is the demise of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a presidential executive order signed by Barack Obama. The order allowed young people brought into this country illegally through no fault of their own to stay. While critics are calling cancellation of the plan by President Trump cruel, the left-leaning Kansas City Star editorial board says Trump is right that DACA was never intended to be a permanent solution. Trump is giving Congress 6 months to fix this lingering issue and has promised no deportations of dreamers during that period. So is the president being cruel? Or is he really doing the dreamers a favor by forcing Congress to act on this whole issue, Lisa?
I think there's no question that this needs a legislative solution, and even President Obama himself admitted as much. It's gone on for far too long.
But he came out when Trump took action and said, oh my God, this is deplorable, it's evil, it's cruel.
Yes, of course. But he himself had formerly said this really needs legislative action. However, I am concerned about whether or not they will be able to accomplish this in the 6 months that they're targeting. The latest word is that they're trying to tie together some kind of status for these young DACA folks with increasing funding for border security. And of course, there was the famous dinner from last night where
Chuck and Nancy.
Yes, Chuck and Nancy went to the president's house to try to work it all out. But the question is, you know, we've seen how little they've been able to get done on topics that are much less complicated that they ostensibly agree on. I'm just not sure
but
this is going to happen.
complicated for Congress in 6 months to say, here's the way these people can stay in the United States? That would seem simple.
It shouldn't be, but the question is, are they going to set aside their partisan squabbles and get something done, or are they going to be too wound up in Chuck and Nancy got to go to the first dinner, so now we're going to dig in our heels and oppose this and not bring it to the floor for a vote?
Let me ask the legal side, not that you're illegal, but let me ask the legal side of the panel. Wasn't Trump's action necessitated by 12 state attorneys general who had filed a lawsuit that was going to take effect the next day that said DACA is illegal, the executive order is illegal and has to be overturned?
So if you're looking at me to answer that question, right. I mean,
yes.
I think that that's certainly the colorable argument he would make. I think that Barack Obama...
Is that not a legitimate argument?
I think it is a legitimate argument, because I think that Obama's executive order was always questionably legally in terms of its enforceability. I think you had 12 attorneys general that I think had a solid legal argument to be made. Whatever side you fall on it, this has to be an issue that passes through Congress. But you also had in Jeff Sessions, I think, someone that had tipped his hand that maybe he wasn't going to go to the mat to ultimately defend the previous executive order. So I think it fell a little out of bounds. At some point, this is an issue that has to be dealt with by Congress. I think everyone would agree on that.
Do you agree, Laura?
Oh, I absolutely. It should be addressed by Congress, because I don't think, I would tend to agree. I don't think you should be doing legislating through executive order. That's not what why we have the balance of powers. And these young dreamers, they need the legislative solution. Like Lisa said, they need something concrete. And executive orders come and go, and one hand can give and the other can take away.
Well, if the polls are right, the Congress is going to act. And they're going to act favorably toward
if Congress
DACA.
doesn't.
Because if they don't, I mean, is there anybody who thinks that they're going to round up 800,000 of these young people and ship them out?
Yeah.
No, that's inconceivable.
Steve, I think you're absolutely right. The issue is going to be linkage, and that is, do they link this to a wall or broad-based immigration reform? If it's just DACA in and of itself or some fix of that, I think that's fine.
Well, they're going to have to decide first if they're going to link it to their parents. And that is going to be the number. That's going to. They have to.
Well, they don't have
hurdle.
to decide that. They could just.
They could. Well, they could not decide it.
The dreamers.
That leaves the parents vulnerable to deportation.
I think the public is really getting tired, and they have been tired of Congress not completing a task and not getting things done. And so it would seem to me behoove Congress to try to solve this, particularly since many of them are going to be up for election in 2018, to help solve this problem that I don't know that there are many Americans that don't think these kids should be able to stay here as a legal.
Steve, finally, a lot of these people are Hispanic, of Hispanic origin. Republicans don't always do well with the Hispanic voters. If Trump is successful in getting this legislation passed and the DACA people get to stay in this country, will that garner additional Hispanic support for the Republicans in the future?
No, I don't think there's anything. After all the scares that have come about and all the follow-up deportations en masse that they're probably going to come, I think Hispanics are very, very leery about the Republican Party. And after all, it isn't the Democrats who are saying we need to deport more people. Although Obama, by the way,
they're saying we need to bring in more. We need to bring in more undocumented Democrats and let them vote. All right, we got to move. Great discussions. Thank you. Now we head to the soapbox for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes have 30 seconds each to celebrate or eviscerate people and events in the news. And let us start with Mike Sanders.
So I think our nation's response to Irma and Harvey, I think, shows so much of what's right with America. If you look at the governmental response from federal, state to local government, coordinating lessons were learned ultimately from Katrina, and I think that was shown. But for me, the most moving aspects of this were how private citizens stepped up. In so many ways, what we could call a modern-day Dunkirk, where people brought their individual boats and their private property out to save people from the flooding, or individuals in Florida that have done the same thing. So much about our response shows so much of what's right with America today.
Lisa.
A roast to those who still believe that Hillary Clinton was the right nominee for the Democratic Party in 2016. In answer to Clinton's book entitled What Happened was that the party nominated someone who was essentially a resume-only candidate mired in controversy, who by her own admission is not a natural politician. If Democrats want to win high-profile statewide and national races going forward, they need to realize that charismatic, compelling candidates are required.
Laura.
Well, I'm going to give a toast to Kevin Yoder for stepping up and helping the young widow of the hate crime in Olathe so that she doesn't, isn't faced with her deportation.
All right, Mr. Rhodes.
I was going to roast again Chris Kobach for his background checks that he wants to have before people can vote. But I decided instead that I'm going to toast Carl Gerlach, mayor of Overland Park, because the city just won the award as the very best city of that size, of large cities in the United States in raising a family. That's quite an honor.
All right, and finally, some in California are still trying to find a way find a way to leave the United States and become a separate country. The latest craziness is called CalCon, standing for California Constitutional Convention. Certainly a roast is in order, but the organizers do deserve some credit. After all, they named their project correctly, a con. And that is Ruckus for this time. Ken Burns' film, The Vietnam War, will fill our time slot for the next 2 weeks. So Ruckus will move to Friday at 8 o'clock for the next 2 weeks. Only now for the next 2 weeks. Now for the Ruckettes and the crew, I'm Mike Shannon saying thanks very much for watching and good night.
Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Hush Blackwell, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, and by viewers like you. Thank you.